So, while everybody is still pouring in, welcome on today's webinar. My name is Ilka Hartmann. I'm the Managing Director of the British Chamber of Commerce, and I'm extremely happy that we could offer another high-level, very interesting webinar. And I want to thank Katharina von Knop, the head of our digital expert group, and I want to thank all the experts that offered to be here. And digitalization and the expert group shows such a variety of topics, and the topic is so wide. So I'm really happy for what you put together, Katharina. And I'm thanking all the participants for choosing to sit here with us and having some food for brains instead of getting sunburns outside or wet feet wherever, if you're in the south of Germany. Welcome. Since I'm not the expert, I'm just happy to listen to everything that's going to be said on this panel and to listen and learn. And thank you so much. Have a great webinar. And Katharina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilka. I'm Katharina, and I'm really happy to serve today as your moderator of this really awesome webinar. The topic is how to keep your health tech brand safe, compliant, and engaged with your online community. Just recently, we have noticed several COVID-19 disinformation campaigns. One very prominent one was against Pfizer-BioNTech, launched by a mysterious PR agency. This was a very offensive disinformation campaign. There also exist much more sophisticated campaigns where they use AI-driven bots, and these are very, very important issues, and especially healthcare companies are here in charge dealing with these threats. And I'm really, really proud to offer you really the best experts on this topic today. We have Max Mueller, the head of corporate public affairs of Germany and European Union with Bayer, a really big gun when it comes to public affairs. Anna-Sophie Harling, the managing director of NewsGuard Technologies. They are offering a superb consumer solution, which is a labeling tool for websites and articles to communicate to user based on specific quality criteria if a solution is trustworthy or how trustworthy is the website. Then we have Hauke Gierow, the head of corporate communication of G-Data. Could someone please turn off the mic, please? Someone is calling. Thank you. So G-Data is a global German cybersecurity company. Yes, global cybersecurity made in Germany. This does exist. I'm the moderator, Dr. Katharina von Knop, the founder of Digital Trust Analytics. This company is a result of my academic research on how digital trust can be built. So I would like to, so the structure of the webinar is the following. We will start with Max Mueller, and each of the speakers gives a short, really, please be disciplined, a short keynote of 5 to 7 minutes. And then we'll focus on the debate. And I'm really, really encouraging you wonderful participants, ask questions, write them in the chat. I really would like to have a vibrant debate today. Max, your talk it's about information, plain and simple. Shoot.
Katharina, Ilka, esteemed guest, thanks for the invitation. Prior to this conversation and this webinar, I wasn't so sure whether it would be my topic that I could speak in the best way about it, given that we have such experts on cybersecurity here. So during my thoughts on that, the fact of information came to mind. When I started in Bayer around about a year ago, I received a lot of online video training programs, and I was super annoyed after I saw all the lists of topics that I had about cybersecurity, and the use of IT and how I can protect myself and more the company from phishing mails and stuff like that. And I wasn't so sure after using the internet and emails and God knows what for more than 2 decades, is this really necessary? But then again, after I went through all these trainings, I figured out how this influenced my daily work. So this sort of constant information, so we are doing repeated versions of these trainings, we are doing tests on these topics on a current basis, is making yourself more aware about these threats that we are facing. And these threats are becoming more and more. In the good old days, when someone was planting false information, you would send out a press release or you call a journalist and you would issue some story in that regard. Now in the world that we're living, information comes so fast that even the tracking of this is only possible through technical options and technical tools rather than using the human brain, given the fact that there is just plainly too much. So we do believe within Bayer that we have to start training ourselves and make ourselves competent in the use and living around these days. Then on the second part, when we look how can we support insightful the use of technology, and for more importantly, how can we inform our labor force in the decision making around this topic, is one of the foundations that helps us quite a lot to deal with our customers, with our clients, with our business partners, but also enhances us in the internal way of digital engagement. Now, when I said it's about information, Katharina, you just mentioned the example that I wanted to use, which is the fake news around vaccines and vaccinations. We have seen threats not only by bots on Twitter and Facebook and all the other channels about the structure of vaccines and how they potentially could have an impact on our own health. More importantly, we doubted that science actually matters. And we're seeing across the globe where people are that lucky that they have access to vaccines, that we have over 30% of the population not wanting to vaccinate themselves. We have seen this in Israel when they started and they hit the wall by 64%. And from that moment on, it became very, very difficult to educate and get more people vaccinated. We're seeing the same development in the United States currently. And just on a side note, the United States, which started 2 months earlier than Germany, has a 55.1 average first vaccinated population. We in Germany are now by 46.5%, so not that far away. And we're seeing to some extent, rather helpless ways of informing the population on why it is so important to vaccinate itself for their own safety, but also for the safety of the environment. When we looked into the fake news, and just a recent study that I have received from our cybersecurity colleagues said that 75% of the fake news have only 12 bases of origin or a foundation of 12 organizations behind it. If that is correct, it shows us how important it is that we have a constant debate on every channel about these threats nowadays. Fake news have become a business model. And on the other side, we all know how important the brand is for us, how important trust is specifically in the part of healthcare. And the way of communicating not only with the consumers, but also if you look into pharmacovigilance with professionals, they have to trust the information that comes from a company that is over 150 years old like we do. So we do live transparency, we do live by our principles, which we summarized in our so-called BASE principles. Therefore, we interact on a constant basis and we are trying to inform. We are trying to learn. We're trying to listen. Nevertheless, it becomes more and more an uphill battle to overcome the massive amount of false information. And then maybe just on a last note to finish up, we just recently saw a debate, and it's still going on patent waiver and intellectual property. Now, just assuming that we would waive patent protection, let's say on the vaccines, who is then able to control as to whether the use of these vaccines is then done by all people correctly? Do we assume that everyone that is then in the potential option of having access to that, able to do this in a proper way? Are we even able to control this? And the answer is pretty much no. We are probably not going to be able to control if patent waivers happening. So there are different ways and different solutions. It's not only about potential business making, but it's also about the integrity of science and the integrity of options. Online counterfeit options is an increasingly growing business. Yes, one may say it takes two to tango, but the fact of the matter is sometimes these laws and these structures, such as IP and patent protection, serve a dual purpose, which is not only to protect the origin of the science, but also it protects the users of such products. So here again, we are trying to, in a more visual world, we're using more videos than we did before because texts are not read that much anymore. We're seeing that due to Twitter, the awareness or the willingness to accept information has gone down to 280 digits in signs. So you have to be fast, you have to be easy, and it has to be understandable for each and everyone. This makes complex answers to complex questions rather an insurmountable task, but nevertheless, we keep on trying. Science for a better life is our claim, and therefore we continue to work on that. Thanks for giving me the chance to speak to you.
Sorry. Thank you very, very much, Max. This was so important. You have highlighted so very important points like integrity. Generating integrity is essential because when consumers, patients are stopping using medications based on misinformation, this could harm them. And this is a truly challenge we are facing. Now, I would like to continue with Anna-Sophie Harling, the Managing Director of NewsGuard. The title of her keynote, of her short, crisp keynote is Protecting Health Brands from Misinformation. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Katharina. So I guess I should also thank Max because he laid out the problem so well. Because I would argue that NewsGuard is one of the companies that's trying to solve the problem that he's outlined, which is that in today's day and age, people have a really hard time distinguishing between credible sources of information and sources that are either inadvertently or deliberately spreading false narratives, especially about things like COVID-19, vaccines, and other health misinformation narratives. NewsGuard is a company that rates the reliability of news and information websites and produce what we call nutrition labels for each website. So we try to give individual users the information they need to know who is behind the website that I've just encountered, who owns them, how are they financed, what are their journalistic practices, have they been flagged by fact-checking organizations, are they transparent about their staff, the corrections policy, what is their history, et cetera, et cetera. We don't seek to block anything or to tell someone to read something or not another, but instead we feel that much like with a can of Pringles, if you are going to consume it, you should at least know what you're putting inside of your body, and we feel the same way about information diet. I got a call from my mother about a week ago saying, make sure you don't get the AstraZeneca vaccine, because it causes infertility. when I asked her how it would do that, she said, because it changes your DNA. And I consider my mom to be quite an intelligent person, and she knows what I do for a living as well. And I asked her where she'd heard that, and she said, because your aunt saw it on Facebook. I spend a lot of my days going through YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to actually see with human eyes what it is that people are sharing, the types of narratives they're encountering, and also how they go about trying to figure out what's true and what's false. Do they actually go to government websites? Do they go to the World Health Organization website when they encounter it? And how do you try to get them quality information in the places where they're seeing bad information? Trust in big health brands is declining, along with an overall decline in paranoia about big institutions and sort of the cornerstones of democracy. Things like governments, electoral processes, and big groups like the World Health Organizations, along with brands like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, etc. And it is in the interest then of large organizations and large health companies to get tools like NewsGuard into the hands of social media users to help equip them with better information so that they can make more informed choices about what they're seeing online. I'll give you an example. Some of the trends that we've seen around things like vaccines are false claims about certain ingredients that might cause some religious communities not to get it, claims that there are microchips or magnets in the vaccine that they might cause infertility or miscarriages, and again, this claim that it changes your DNA. And these types of claims are widespreading, and as we've seen now with the pandemic, but also in quote-unquote normal times, health misinformation is rampant about 5G causing cancer, fake cures, and Facebook groups that sell vaccine cures for parents to quote-unquote detox their children after they've been exposed to vaccinated children. So one thing you can do is to try to get tools like NewsGuards and fact checks into the hands of users. But there's another big part of what we do, which is to help health companies play a role in the advertising side of things. The advertising industry has the ability to make a huge difference with misinformation by driving their ad revenue and spend away from purveyors of misinformation and towards credible journalism and credible information websites. So we see big brands like Pfizer, the CDC, and brands that are on this call running advertisements on websites that are publishing false information about vaccines. They can make a real difference by working with organizations like NewsGuard that use human beings to rate the credibility of websites, unlike most brand safety companies which use artificial intelligence. So I think these are two different ways. One is behind the scenes, sort of to pull the financial incentive on a lot of these misinformation websites to exist, to pull that advertising revenue, and on the user side, giving users more information to make informed decisions about information online. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anna. This is so important to give, from a consumer perspective, the consumers the ability to judge by specific labels the content, the quality of the content of specific media. Because from a consumer, it's nearly impossible to deal with one of these thousands of OSINT tools to identify if a content is true or not. This is really one step in really to produce digital trust is really essential. Now we are coming to Hauke. Wonderful. The talk, so he's coming from G-Data. It's a cybersecurity company, so he provides a different perspective. His talk is Prepare Your Brand for Inevitable IT Security Crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Katharina, and thank you to the British Chamber for having me. And also thanks to Anna and to Max, because I think the topic that you brought up of fake news is very much connected with cybersecurity topic. So let me say a few words on this before I start with what I planned. So I think those are really two sides of one coin, because what we see a lot is fake news that are fueled by hacking, right? So we saw the hack of the EMA last year, I think in November or so. And experts believe, and I think that's true, that this was not only about like stealing intellectual property, but also about receiving information that might be used in disinformation campaigns surrounding the vaccines. So, right, obtaining information through hacking that can then be used in a hack and leak operation of any sort. So I think this is also something that brands that are doing research and development in sensitive areas should really look at. That this information, internal information, if it gets hacked and leaked, can be used to fuel disinformation campaigns. And so this, then cybersecurity becomes even more important, and not only for protecting your intellectual property. So yeah, maybe that as a small preface. And then, of course, we have the saying that there are two types of companies, those who have been hacked and those who don't know yet, right? So yeah, today it's really unrealistic to think that you will never have an IT security incident as a big company. It's just unrealistic. So all brands have to prepare for that. And in the medical sector, we're seeing quite a lot of attacks, even though attackers sometimes say they try to spare hospitals or so. This isn't really the case. Only in the last year there have been 3 or 4 cases that I know of, and I think there are many more in Germany where hospitals couldn't operate because of ransomware. And this, of course, has then dramatic consequences. And also the medical sector is, of course, a huge target, because hospitals and also doctors, they use a lot of very expensive equipment that is used for years and maybe tens of years sometimes. So if you buy a new CT, it's not something you keep around for 2 years, but maybe 10, 15, 20 years, right? And so we see a lot of old but still functioning equipment, IT equipment in hospitals. But this, of course, greatly is a greatly bigger attack surface then. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was at my doctor and they had an X-ray machine, and this was fueled by a Windows XP computer. So this is not something you want to see. And then what we see it's because G-Data is active in the classical, I say, antivirus market, so has endpoint protection solutions, but we are also doing incident response. So when a company crashes, when there's an incident, we go out and we fix everything. And what we see a lot is that companies are suffering much harder than they need to because of bad preparation. And so this is what I want to go at. So a lot of companies, they don't have a plan for when it happens. And this is really essential, right? There should be clear communications channels. Then if somebody detects or thinks there is a security incident, there should be a plan on who to call and which chain of command is then activated. And there should be an all-hands meeting so that everybody is on the same page. This is a very essential step. It's not very hard to plan that, but it's very essential to have it. And then the next question is, okay, so now an incident team is called, an external team, but in most cases, this incident team, they don't know anybody at the company. They don't know anything about the network. They don't know anything about the equipment used. They don't really know which processes are business critical and which are not. So they have to come in and really have to learn a lot. And so what companies can do to prepare is to have an IT security company and take them in beforehand, right? So they can, the incident responders, if it happens at some time, they will know the people, they will know the network, they will know the basic network topology, and this can really make the response much more effective and much faster. And so this will, in most cases, save a lot of money in the end, because the companies back up much quicker with this kind of preparation. And this was my timer, so I'm trying to finish up. Yeah, so this is really one thing that companies should do and think about. And then, of course, all companies need, especially in the medical sector, also a communication strategy, right? So nowadays, whenever there's personal data involved, you need to inform the DPA, in Europe at least, within 72 hours. And 72 hours really isn't a lot of time. So, and it's okay if you don't know everything at this point, right? But you should be able to make an informed guess of what happened and transmit this to the DPA to avoid a regulatory disaster in the end. Because this, of course, can then also cause a lot of problems on top of the existing IT security problems. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Hauke, for your really helpful advice, especially when it comes to response. And I would like to encourage the participants to write their questions in the chat. You really have here now 4 really leading experts, and which are investing their time, spending their time to provide you really helpful information. So please write your questions in the chat. Now we are coming to the 4th speaker, Todd Nielsen. Sorry, I've not introduced him before. It's Island 23, and Island 23 is the specialist on online community consultancy. So when it comes to online community management, engaging your community, and he's really the one, he looks back to over 20 years of healthcare experiences and has conducted really successful projects with the NHS, really awesome. So his talk is on full spectrum crisis preparedness for your health tech brand. Todd, the floor is yours. Shoot.
Thank you so much, Katharina, and thanks to my colleagues who came before. I really appreciated the things that you said so far around Max along the lines of transparency. I'm going to touch upon that. Anna, I love the idea of nutritional labels. That's such an amazing idea, especially being able to apply pressure to some of the advertising revenue for these organizations that spread disinformation. And Hauke, the idea of having a plan, I definitely want to hit upon that, as you can tell from the title of what I'm talking about here. What I want to provide for you here in the short time that I've got available is 7 points within 7 minutes around some things for you to think about for managing your health tech brand and what you're doing. And my approach to this is not necessarily fully focused on technology, but looking at the ways in which our own human intelligence efforts as well as technology can be combined to powerfully be prepared for, be vigilant for, and to respond to in a timely way these kinds of informational crises as they happen to arise. And as Katharina said, my colleague Darren and I with Island 23, we work a lot in online communities. And I guess the first question that begs is what do you mean by an online community? In many cases, organizations will think of their online community as their Facebook page or their Twitter feed, and that's only really a part of it. As far as you should be thinking about online community, it's everywhere that your employees, your partners, your customers, your stakeholders, and the media and any interested members of the public are interacting with your brand. And the difference in platforms will obviously make a difference in how you interact. If you have a private discussion board or forum or an app on the phone where people can post things that they're thinking about, or people can post information or ideas, that's going to be very different than the way that you may respond on Twitter, where it's a more public venue and there's other kinds of ideas at play. So in thinking about some of those things, big social platforms versus private support communities versus even your intranet, where employees may be sharing things that you feel are maybe not necessarily factually correct, you need to have some good ways to think about those groups and engage with them. An example of a way this happens in private communities, some years ago, I worked with an organization that was dedicated to helping people quit smoking online. And so there were a lot of discussions within that organization about using nicotine patches like Chantix in order to quit smoking. And they were really concerned about evidence-based treatments to help people quit smoking. But people within that community, in a very well-meaning way, not even in a disinformation sort of fashion, but a misinformation fashion, were bringing to bear all kinds of anecdotal kinds of materials or things to help people quit smoking. And how do you respond to that as an organization? And it requires both being able to detect those things with things like social media monitoring and your analytics and AI-based tools, such as my colleagues have mentioned, but as well having a live presence in those places and fostering conversations around what makes sense. So I'm halfway through. I'm going to go through some of my other points here. Point number 2 is related to what I was just saying. Listen relentlessly and in multiple ways. Don't just depend on one AI-based tool to detect conversations that need to be responded to. Obviously, you need to cast a wide net and see things that may be problem areas, but you also need your social media team, your communications team, your public relations professionals to be always watching and always vigilant on their personal feeds, as well as whatever forums they happen to participate in, whatever the online venue or community happens to be where they are. And so, if your organization is not doing anything more than running Google alerts, you probably need to set up at least 1 or 2 other tools that are tracking mentions, as well as whatever your AI-based tool happens to be for forum moderation. Point number 3, use people and technology together to stay safe. I think it is a mix of the 2 things. I'm seeing the emergence of some new AI-based moderation tools that will take care of the clear-cut cases of instances where a correction needs to be posted or a post needs to be flagged to be removed from a discussion. But then that tool also needs to be helpful in partnering with whoever is managing your online community interactions so that they can be flagged in cases where it may be less clear or a little more gray, or some nuance in decision-making has to happen. Point number 4, know how to recognize when a crisis arises and recognize what you cannot control or influence within that. So just sort of recognizing crisis arises, have those measurement tools in place, have the alerts in place, and have a plan for who information is going to be escalated to and when a situation arises. Your executive leadership may need to know right away, but who else in your organization needs to respond? Who else needs to have the factual information to reply with and react to? Point number 5, transparency and honesty is going to keep you compliant. I think at the heart of a lot of the reasons why we're dealing with so much around disinformation and misinformation in online venues has a lot to do with how honest and open we are as organizations about what we're trying to do. I've worked with organizations that are in the pharmaceutical space, and they want to get customer information about how their drug or their product happens to be used. And they don't they wonder what was wrong, that they don't disclose that how they're going to use that information or why they're going to use that information in terms of service. If you're not being transparent about that, people aren't going to trust you, and they're going to begin spinning up ideas about why you're doing the things you're doing, why your vaccine can't be trusted, why this is a problem. And so recognizing and understanding that and keeping honest and open is important. Point number 6, favor conversations over messaging. it's very tempting to have sort of a press release, and I think Max had alluded to this earlier, pushing out a message to your press contacts, having some kind of corrective response. But we're living in social media spaces that are not as often used for actual conversation and trust building exercises with our customers and with our constituents. And so having real conversation and favoring that over pushing one-way messages is incredibly important. And then finally, just coming in a little over 7 minutes, I apologize for that. Number 7, fostering trust by demonstrating benevolence. And what I mean by that is we need to look for ways to build deeper trust between people who enter our online spaces and our communities. How do we do good things for them? How do we praise people that are great stories to tell about the success of your product or your service that you have, and really create that as a behavior that is going to be duplicated by other people that are participating in your communities. Katharina, I apologize for going slightly over.
Thank you very much. I could listen to you really for hours. I really love your really 7 crisp advisory points you have shared. These are really so useful, and really reacting in time, even when you use these tools, like the social listening tools like Lexalytics. It's such a challenge to respond accordingly in the voice of your community. This is really an important issue, and so important really to positively engage your community. It's essential. And again, I'm really encouraging the participants, write your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to ask your question with your voice. You really have here 4 awesome experts. Few questions have been already typed in the chat. So the first one goes to Anna. Anna, what technological or other solutions are available or are already being deployed to reinforce trustworthiness and data sourcing? Oops. When the goalposts or veracity in general are being shifted almost as we speak.
Sure, I think so. There are a lot of different organizations within the safety tech community that are trying to come up with solutions to different types of trust-based problems. There's a big initiative being run by Adobe about verifying video and image content so that you can, they reckon that sort of within 5 or 10 years, when you come across an image or a video on social media or online, you have to assume that it's fraudulent or a deep fake before you can assume that it's true, unless you see a little sign or a stamp that's authenticating the veracity of the information or the source itself. The NewsGuard approach just looks at, for the moment, the domain level. So what we can do is we can authenticate, when you're scrolling through Twitter, when you come across the NHS website, is it in fact the NHS website, or is it in fact the BBC, or is it a website that's pretending to be that? A big part of what we do as well is just to try to get users to think critically about the sources that they encounter. That can often be the most important part, which is that we tend to just consume information online without thinking that maybe not all sources are created equal. There are a lot of organizations that are coming up with ways to tackle this using artificial intelligence, looking at different indicators. But I think, as Todd has said, it's going to be a combination of human intelligence applied at scale. So one thing that we're working on is we have a machine-readable database of all the major false narratives and claims, hundreds of them that we see going across the internet. And you can imagine that we work with artificial intelligence companies and others to take that information and then apply it at scale. So a human decides what is true, what is false, and then teaches a machine to find instances of that on places like YouTube, TikTok, or Twitter. So there are initiatives out there. There's the Journalism Trust Initiative, which is trying to create a type of global standard through which organizations have to register to become accredited, and that will work with different platforms to decide sort of what information gets pushed up in search results and so on. But as Max has said, what we really need is a user base and just general internet users who really think critically and are also well equipped to have digital literacy skills for the 21st century. And then you start getting into conversations about the role of schools, etc. But that's for a different panel.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm asking, was the answer appropriate? No, was it? Okay, it was fine. Happy, fine, wonderful. Yes, achieving digital literacy is a true challenge. There's one question that was coming in by one participant. From a strategic, this question refers to Max. From a strategic point of view, could joint industry-wide norms and standards be an important part of the solutions? Well, it will take years or decades if we'll achieve this digital literacy on a global scale. So would be norms a part of the solution, Max?
Against the usual likelihood and of my daily business, I would say no, because we're talking about global development, which would probably require a global understanding of that, and I don't believe this is really feasible. It is rather sort of a band-aid that's looking like it would solve something. And by the way, most of the times regulation in this part, specifically when it comes to digitalization, is 3 to 5 years delayed of the actual technical development. What I do believe, though, is a very interesting development is on the AI directive that we're currently discussing, or is about to start in the discussion in Brussels within the EU. I think the perspective, and Todd referred to that by some measures, if we get a common understanding, at least let's say on G20 level or within the United Nations, on the ethical impact of AI, this could serve to some extent the right intention of this topic. Not necessarily solve the problem, but it gives a certain path that works. The second topic is, and I think that we learned this in this pandemic, we all were somehow, or most of us at least, were somehow connected to the topic of homeschooling. And we have seen how our children are being, on the one hand side, learning to use technology like we do, whether it's Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever. But at the same time, they got used to a constant drumbeat of using the internet and virtual topics. Now, God knows what they have been attached to at the same time. And so now it is up for us as the parents, working together with the schools and with, I don't know, sports organizations, etc., in order to really get this digital literacy in a certain pathway, in order that they are not confusing false information because it's made in a proper way for real information. I mean, if you have a book, you have some context on a piece of paper that makes it a bit more difficult to underline. So, and therefore, I think this is a huge task for our society, where civil society, industry, politicians, regulators have to work together on a fast note. I do not believe that whatever sort of regulation we do on a global scale against fake news would be helpful. The only thing, and this is something that we're already working on in many, many countries in the world, is the criminal law. If you are being caught doing and acting criminal, then there is already enough regulation in place technically to use that, and therefore I don't see a lot of sense into that.
Thank you very much, Max. Well, it is a true challenge to bring a bot into the jail. So this is maybe on the other hand side, a really challenge. I just received a message from the German Armed Forces. They're very, very sorry that they could not make it to join based on a crisis situation, but protecting their brand online is also for them a very, very important issue. And so sorry, but they really have just written a very, very nice message. Max, someone wrote a question. They're interested if you would like to share or elaborate a bit more of the buyer strategy online. So how you are dealing with these disinformation, misinformation in social media and other forums and platforms?
Well, I think it would probably break the time frame that we have available, but some of the methods that Todd just elaborated are our daily core. So it's not only managing communities on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, but it's actually understanding what is the social world actually talking about. It's understanding through the use of digital tools, comparing them or using them together with the human mind to see what are trends, where are things developing, and then also saying, is this the right way of answering, or are we feeding the troll? This is also a decision that we believe is very important. Sometimes you have people who are willing to listen or willing to have that, as what Todd described as the discussion or the debate in the virtual format. And then sometimes it's also making hard choices as to whether every channel is worthwhile for the approach that we have to take. So if you look, for instance, into Instagram is a very powerful tool, but on the flip side is it always the best channel for a company like ours to use that? Not playing every drum makes a good sound. So therefore, this elaboration of what is the right channel for us. So LinkedIn is, of course, a very powerful channel nowadays for interacting internally and externally, while Facebook is developing in a total different world. We see the chat groups in let's say WhatsApp. It's an unknown world. So do you really want to have your cell phone pinging every 2 seconds because you have the same sort of interaction like you have in Twitter? This is what we're doing, and we have a very dedicated and great group of people that works with science, with experts, has constant interactions, and there is not the strategy that you start on the 1st of January that is the same at the 31st of December. You are moving on a daily basis into that. By standing by your core, you're evolving on a daily basis. I don't know if this fits the question, but it is so dynamic that what you believe on Monday is a great strategy for a certain issue that you want to discuss. By Monday lunchtime, you already throw it in the trash because you see it's not working. The good thing, though, is if you have a huge media campaign with ad buys, etc., on TV, once you made that choice and it's the wrong way, then it's sunk money, right? In the virtual world, you can redress, reshape, so to say, basically in a second if something is not working. And this is, I think, the advantage that we are also having.
Thank you very, very much. Has any one of the speakers something to add, to comment?
Yes.
Todd, shoot.
Well, sorry.
Second. Todd was a bit faster.
Yeah, no, I really love that. Just a couple of quick thoughts. As Max said, not every platform is the right place to have that corrective conversation. So there's opportunities to maybe choose the ground on which you offer that factual information or that corrected information, or to host those conversations. And picking whether that's going to be a LinkedIn live broadcast or your Instagram feed or your private online community is an interesting question. You want to put yourself to the best advantage in those situations. So maybe you're not going to hold that Ask Me Anything session using live streaming on Instagram, but maybe you're going to pull them into your community where you can get them to sign up and expose them to other kinds of factual information and other people that maybe have the right kinds of narratives that you want to guide them towards. I think that's important. And the other thing that I would add very quickly is we haven't really talked about this, but in addition to preparedness and attentiveness, watching for trouble, I think it's also very important for more and more organizations to engage in, I think, the intelligence circles would call it wargaming, but actively playing out scenarios of how you're going to react to situations. Some time ago, I saw the astronaut Chris Hadfield from Canada talking about how they prepared for crisis. Well, they would bring up the crisis situation and the astronauts would practice again and again and again how they would respond to certain difficult situations. And I think we need to get better at doing those sorts of things.
Thank you very much. Hauke.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to the question, do we need regulation or norms to help us protect against these kind of things? And I wanted to share a perspective where I'm really critical of that. So I used to work for Reporters Without Borders, and I helped build their digital and security strategy. And I also did a lot of research on China. So the first thing is that you will never have any kind of global norm that is accepted globally, right? And so that is the first problem. And at Reporters Without Borders, we had a lot of discussions internally because all of the big networks have content moderation policies, right? Facebook has, YouTube has, and one of the big early global tests, I think, was how YouTube and Google dealt with the innocence of Muslims video, right? They deleted it in some jurisdictions and not in others. But we were thinking about what is the position that we have as Reporters Without Borders at that time, and it's really difficult, and it's not easy to come up with a very good position that can be applied globally, right? And so you have speech at such a massive scale that it's really hard to do, but what you do can really harm a lot, right? And of course, I'm sure that Donald Trump would have loved regulation on fake things that he considered fake news, for example, and shut out opposition in that regard, right? So I think, and this was said earlier, every society has a huge responsibility to be responsible and to educate children, but not educate them what they should think, but educate them on how to critically judge sources, right? And I think that is what we need to work towards too.
Thank you very much. Well, the critical judging sources is from a neuropsychological perspective quite an issue. It's becoming more and more challenging because the number of impulses we are receiving every day are growing intensively. Now I'm interested in Anna's perspective on this issue.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think I also am involved in the UK communications regulator, Ofcom, and there's a big question there. I mean, the UK is rolling out tech regulation that will hold platforms to account on certain quote-unquote online harms, misinformation being one of them. And the question there is, do we deal with it on a content-by-content basis, right? Do we try to do maybe what the Germans have done and go after individual pieces of false content and try to get the platforms to take them down within a certain time period? And we've also had the Facebook Oversight Board decision about deplatforming. So between deplatforming and blocking of content or removal, those are arguably very blunt tools through which to fight misinformation. You also have the problem that removing misinformation oftentimes strengthens people's belief that the truth is being deliberately hid from them, or that the world is being controlled by certain bad actors who have a monopoly over online discourse. So the real question is, from a regulatory point of view, can we do two things? Can we increase media literacy and digital literacy by getting tools into the hands of users that are free to all, that help strengthen media literacy for those who are typically underserved in those areas. But the second thing is also when we look at a platform like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, are the platforms themselves, and is the design actually pushing people towards misinformation narratives and towards non-credible sources of information? Because these platforms operate in a very opaque manner, we don't actually know what the algorithms are optimizing for. And that oftentimes means that, that the type of content that gets a lot of engagement tends to be content and information that is oftentimes outrageous, that evokes emotion, that is spectacular and oftentimes false. You also have recommendation systems that look at when people join certain groups that might push them towards certain more extreme groups. So at the start of the pandemic, I joined an anti-hand wash group, back when in the UK we were being told to wash our hands for 20 seconds. And Facebook asked me if I wanted to join an anti-lockdown group. And from the anti-lockdown group, I was pushed towards a COVID is a hoax group. And from there, I got pushed towards a Bill Gates is evil, we will not take the vaccine group, which grew to over 200,000 people. So the question is, beyond individual pieces of misinformation, we should be taking a closer look at the information ecosystems that are being created online. Part of the tricky issue is that I have no idea what your Facebook feed looks like. You have no idea what my Twitter feed looks like. They're each personalized. And it means that people can live in alternate realities, whereby they might just think that the brand Pfizer is evil and is, deliberately trying to sterilize a large portion of the population, that Bill Gates might have certain hidden agendas. And that's a reality that they're fed every day in the environment where they are operating. And because the world is increasingly online, and because we've all been forced to look at our computers the last 12 months, people really operate and think within those online ecosystems. So how do we help people break out of those? And how do we prevent them from being pushed into them in the first place? So thinking about how people engage with information, where they go to get it. A small tidbit, most people don't know that the place where people go to get information on TikTok is in the comment section. So when they come across a video about vaccines or certain cures, they will go to the comment section to see, what are my peers thinking? What do other people think about this? And the highest rated comments are at the top, and those are the comments that people will trust. So thinking more holistically about platform design, recommendation systems, algorithms, transparency, accountability, getting people to ask questions and think critically. Those are all just as important as trying to decide what stays up and what gets taken down.
Thank you very much, Anna. Two questions to you again. One refers to the issue of the trend that Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok are busy building up their own transparency tools. When it comes to producing digital trust, what is here your perspective? And this is today a joint event of the UK Department for International Trade and the British Chamber of Commerce. And someone from the Department of International Trade is asking the question, is there a difference between digital literacy between Germany and UK?
Ooh. Okay, I'll try to tackle it first, although I think they're actually quite connected. The reason why this relationship between the UK and Germany is fascinating on the safety tech side is because, both are countries that have companies that are sort of at the forefront of doing this safety tech stuff, which is a completely new and niche industry. But it's an industry that comes out of trying to solve a lot of the technical problems and online harms that big platforms have created, and trying to create independent, transparent, accountable solutions that operate as a counterweight to the internal, oftentimes opaque and siloed solutions that are being built in-house in every platform. So from a government's perspective, you can imagine that in order to encourage competition and innovation and to protect users in each country, it's great that governments are promoting and pushing these safety tech companies, but what needs to be done more is trying to get the platforms who operate as gatekeepers oftentimes to work proactively and actively with these companies. These companies are building really good solutions. The question is, how do we ensure that they actually get put in the hands of users? Because in order for that to happen, we do rely on the people who are, running the spaces and operating the platform or accessing these harms. What I would say is that the reason why these safety tech firms also present the issues that we have is that these platforms are headquartered in the US, and they're making content decisions and safety decisions about people on the other end of the world. So the question is, A, is that a priority for them? And B, are they the best people to be making those decisions? If you outsource some of these tools and solutions to local safety tech firms, you do remove some of that agency and the power of those platforms to make unilateral, entirely opaque decisions about local elections, about local information, misinformation, etc. So I would say the best thing that we can hope for is that a country like Germany develops its own safety tech companies that work closely and learn from, and also help inform and teach UK companies and beyond. But that each of these local solutions need to be intimately informed of and involved with the people in the countries that they're serving and the types of harms that they're encountering, because they will all be slightly different. The nuances will be different. And we can't just rely on like 5 big companies to protect everyone globally.
Thank you very much, Anna. Your connection is not that well. I'm not sure if you could do something to improve it. So the picture was not that well, but we could hear you properly. So that was most important.
I was just suggest turning off my camera, so I can do that as well. That usually helps.
Sometimes it does. So Germany and UK are both democracies, and here freedom, and someone is making here a point which is very important to debate. What is your take on freedom of speech in democracy and controlling the flow of information online? To the speakers, well, the line is fine. It's a very, very fine line when you start controlling the information and also limiting the freedom of speech. And on the other hand, enabling democracy and the freedom of speech. I assume this question goes to all speakers. Who would like to shoot first?
Well, I always found it fascinating. So I did a lot of research comparing what countries, different countries, what is their cybersecurity strategy. And looking at China, it was pretty, they usually speak about informational security, if you translate it. And so it was always clear that they don't just mean the safety of the systems themselves, but what is transmitted through them, right? Like the ideological part of security. And this is something that is a unique perspective. When you look at the details in language, also Russia also supports it in some forums. And so I think that we, from a Western perspective, need to learn that there are fundamentally other ways of defining cybersecurity, and that this kind of ideological safety is part of it in some cultures. I mean, in Germany, we have the Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz, which also got a lot of criticism from many groups, which isn't comparable in any sense, of course, to what China or Russia are doing. but which also try to go a step closer to the content perspective.
Max, do you have a perspective, a comment?
I think we have made quite a lot of progress here in Europe, or in mainland Europe, I may say, over the last, let's say, 10 years, in taking this issue more and more serious, also with investing more money in it. It's I think that developments we have seen by NATO and by our armed forces here in Europe, building up cybersecurity infrastructure at a broader scale than we had before, is a pretty good sign of how this topic has become more in the center focus, rather than having the newest tank or whatsoever. Secondly, if you look into the German, let's say, cybersecurity infrastructure, I mean, it's sometimes difficult if you manage to get funding on the civil service base to get the right sort of expertise being attracted to this topic. Not that civil service is not interesting, but it is. These experts move so quickly and are so highly sought that in the end, it is also the market that decides who is best suitable to do this. So also, in uphill battle, I think everyone understood that the new security threats are coming via cyber and not by the usual breaching of maybe borders. So therefore, because in this world there are no borders, but I would say that we're still far away from even being close to what the United States or China has developed in that regard, and there's still a lot of things to do here.
Thank you very much, Max. Todd, freedom of speech.
It's an interesting topic, one that I spend a lot of time on. Well, of course, as we think about freedom of speech, we're talking about a lot of social media platforms that are private companies. And they're under no compunction to offer freedom of speech around anything. It's based upon what's good for them financially, and what's going to get them in trouble legally with the countries in which they operate. So I think that's certainly an open question. When a lot of times when people will bring up freedom of speech, and I'm based in the United States, so frequently this is an issue over here where people are banging the drum of freedom of speech, when what they're really saying is, I want to say, I want to say whatever I want, so that my particular political point of view is respected. But they're asking for these things within private online, or within online community platforms, within social media platforms, and so I look at it with great interest. I think that we need to be careful drawing distinctions between the types of actors that are offering their ideas. Many times brands or organizations that I work with are very uncomfortable with people even just expressing their opinions about something, whether it's disinformation or they're just expressing their opinion. If someone is expressing themselves in an angry way, we may perceive that as somebody who we don't want in our community. But often those kinds of discussions where people are expressing contrarian opinions are things that actually drive engagement and interest, because other people will want to jump in and offer a correction. So again, it's important to have that crisis escalation plan in place, where you almost have a workflow or a flow chart to help any of your frontline communications team to recognize what's something that requires a response versus something that you should just let stand, maybe not comment on, and let it pass by. And so, encouraging that free interaction, I think, is important, and a part of that transparency and trust building that I raised as one of my points.
Thank you very much, Todd. And also the question comes up, also, do have bots also the right of freedom of speech? As we know that a growing number of these posts and sentiments are being created by bots, and especially when it comes to disinformation, the reason here is pretty clear and it's obvious. We have there a huge lack of a legal framework. As I already said, it's nearly, will you jail a bot? It's nearly impossible. So the last chance for our participants to place their question, I really encourage. So we have really not that many, but really awesome participants. Please write your question in the chat. If you don't have any more questions, I would like to come to an end of this really vibrant and fascinating round. It's really awesome. Finally, I would like to ask all of you to zoom up from a corporate perspective as well as a consumer perspective. What are the 3 things a company or consumer shall do when they are reading, listening to health information online? Would like to start with Anna.
Sure, I hope my internet stays.
Okay, then I'll ask Todd.
Sure.
I'm happy to go first. I was just saying, I hope my internet survives this.
Okay.
So let me, is it still okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I would just say, on a very fundamental basis, make sure that you're getting your sources of information or your information from not necessarily from social media, and if it is on social media, it's deliberate. Check the URL, make sure that it's a source that you recognize, and if you're in doubt, go through the website and see if you can find bylines on articles, information about who owns the website and who's behind it, and those types of things. And then I would just say, for every major company, work with your advertising agency to make sure that you're not inadvertently funding sources of misinformation and bad actors. It's something that every company can do. It has nothing to do with freedom of expression, but it's more of companies are spending a lot of money on advertising, and a big reason why misinformation exists online is to generate advertising clicks and revenue. So there's a huge role that can be played from big brands to help remove that financial incentive.
Thank you very much, Anna. I would like to interrupt this final round because Volker has a question. Volker? Volker, chat? Volker? You raised your hand. So do you have a question? So unmute. You need to unmute your system. No? No question or yes? It's hard to see you. No question. Okay. Then next one. Todd, please shoot.
If I remember what you said, you were asking for how consumers.
Consumers from a corporate perspective. What are the 3 things they shall do when they consume health tech information or health information online?
Certainly. So, well, I think Anna, I wouldn't disagree with anything that she said. I think that the, helping to raise the level of your own digital literacy by questioning sources, by looking at whether, it's reputable places for news. But I think as a consumer, consumers also need to become a little more literate and recognizing when another consumer or other individuals are trying to sway their opinion through gaslighting, or trying to get them to see the world in a different way without offering any credible evidence around it, or distracting from the issue by adding in different points. I think we all need to be a little bit better with some of our verbal judo and understanding, how people are trying to actively manipulate our opinions in online spaces. So I'll leave it at those points.
Thank you very much. And now we have cybersecurity's perspective from Hauke.
Yes, and I'd like to change the question one word, because it's not only about consuming, but also about providing health information. And people should be really, really vigilant about that. So, as an example, we had everybody wants to get vaccinated now, but it was pretty slow in Germany for a long time. And then some startups came up and said, Impftermin sofort buchen.de or something. And a lot of people were really willing to offer a lot of personal information to enter and hope they will get a quick vaccination appointment after providing this information. And there are now in the pandemic, of course, a lot of portals and startups and firms that soak up a lot of data, right? So also we have a free scheme for COVID fast tests in Germany, and a lot of the providers, they will want you to register with your ID number. And why should you give some shady thing that didn't even exist like two weeks ago your ID number just in order to get a test, right? So I think vigilance is really important about providing information. And then if you go to the consumer side, of course, I would always recommend that people have a security solution on their computer that can also warn against phishing attempts. So it's not always only about malware, but also about phishing and spam and scam sites that you could also be alerted through a good solution. So yeah, that's my take.
Thank you very much, Hauke. Now the closing words, Max.
Thank you, Katharina. Well, for us, the thing is maybe a little bit easier because we're living this on a daily basis. It's trust, it's integrity, and it's transparency. We talk about science, and our vision is health for all, hunger for none. And in doing so, this is a very high ambition that we're working on every day. And so trust can be vanished within seconds. So everything we do in communicating is based on this vision and based on this foundation, because otherwise what has been built up for over 150 years can be evaporated within seconds. So everything that we're trying to set up in this world is based on these principles. And if I may say so, yes, sometimes you lose in a battle of competition to some extent on a short notice. But in the longer run, being perceived as a trusted partner is what gives this strategy, I think, the right value. And then on detailed basis, we have heard from Todd, from Hauke, from Anna, so many good advices, and I do believe this is cause for another conversation on the options of online marketing and social marketing. So I would leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Max. Just for the ones who are not that deeply involved or have a deeper insight of pharma companies, the quality management they do have installed until a post really goes public, it's really intense. And also the analysis of all the sediments, they have huge teams, it's really manicured, it's really amazing what effort they are really investing here to protect their brand, but also to protect their consumers, really to provide them the correct information. So thank you very, very much. It was the best panel I ever had. You're all awesome speakers, and to the participants, please follow the advices you have given here, provided for free. but really the best experts we do have, you will benefit from these advices in your personal life, but also in your professional life. And I would like to leave the final words to our Commander-in-Chief of the British Chamber, Ilka.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to all the participants. Thank you very much, Katharina, for putting this together. I learned a lot, but digitalization will not leave us. Future progress we should not, not take advantage of, but be very, very careful. So it's managing the chances and the risks, and make the best of both of worlds, and be brave, but be very cautious about everything. Thank you for all the insights. For my private research in the internet, I learned a lot, and we will continue this series with all the topics, because it's gonna be, the future will be quick and fast, and it will be digital. So it's a good advice to stay tuned and know where the chances are, but also where to watch out for other things. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Enjoy the nice weather, the lifting of the lockdown, so go and have a beer in the beer garden, but stay 1.5 meters off the next person. But yeah, stay healthy, and stay tuned, and be a friend of British Chamber. And hopefully one of these days we do this webinar with real people in a real conference room and have a glass of wine afterwards. Thank you so much, and thank you, Katharina.